So today's spiritual unity casserole is going to put a bunch of things together, including a story that I had in prison yesterday, some Hindu teachings, and a bunch of stuff that I sort of made up, some psychological concepts, right? We're going to mix it all together. It'll taste good if you're into unity, okay? If you don't like unity, you won't like it. But if you want to see how we're all one in spite of all our differences, well, then this should be a casserole you will like, okay? So a couple weeks ago, we did a lecture on the still small voice, which is a voice that most of us don't hear very often, and yet in the Bible it says it's there, and it's in all of us. It can't leave you; it's there. But the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying says we rarely pay attention to it. Right? It's there. We have this other voice that Corinthians describes ultimately as a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal called the ego, and that's the voice we listen to. So I was studying some Hindu stuff and came across some superb concepts. Once again, once you know what the point is or what it's all about, then the pieces of the puzzle come together nicely. And I'm like, wow, this is really deep. It's really cool. It's really neat. And I'll describe some of these words in detail in the writing, and the concepts are really precise. But I was first affirmed of that still small voice yesterday in prison. I get to work. I have the blessing, really, of working with inmates. It's wonderfully affirming, and you can see so many truths when you get to have that type of experience. But I also learned not to judge, right? There was a moment, there were about 20 guys, and the guys at the back, they looked a little jaded, a little bit cynical. That's what I thought, at least. And at one point, halfway through, because we talk about stuff like this, some of the physics and all that, and the guy throws down his pencil, and he throws his paper, and he just sort of sighs, and he throws his arms, together. And I'm like, oh, he doesn't like this. He thinks I'm full of it, that kind of thing. And I'm like, well, I'm just not going to focus on him. I'll focus on other people. And, I've had that experience before. But within about a minute, it's completely changed, okay? And he goes, oh, dude. He's like, all you're doing is talking about all the stuff I've been thinking about. I'm like, oh, okay, well, tell me more. And he proceeds to tell me, and again, this is quite affirming, he proceeds to tell me that, I'll talk a little bit like him. He was like, when I committed the crime, right? When I did what I was not supposed to be doing, I heard this voice, and the voice was telling me, don't do that. He was more colorful than that, I assure you. Don't do that. But then I heard this other voice saying, you should do it, right? And then he had this argument going back and forth in his head. And one of the other guys to my left, he goes, that's what I experienced. He said, I was literally going to do the thing I wasn't supposed to do, and a cop pulled in front of me. And I even thought, oh, that's a sign. I shouldn't do this, right? And he goes, I heard the voice clearly. And then I heard another voice saying, no, you should. And then all the guys are they're just laughing about that, I had that experience too. And that original guy says to me, am I supposed to be listening to that one voice? And I'm like, yes, that's what this is all about. And he even noticed, he goes, is that what meditation is for? I'm like, yes, that's what it's for. You have to listen to that other voice. We sometimes call it your conscience, It's your higher mind, it's your higher self, it's so many different things, it's your soul, it's there. But, like the Book of the Living and Dying says, we rarely attend to it. But they both heard it, and everyone else got it. And he even says to me, does everyone have that voice? I heard that some people don't have that voice. And he says, what would you call that person? I said, that's called a psychopath. Because not everyone's listening to that voice, and it's almost never there for them. And I said, I'm not sure I've ever even run into one. I've worked with a lot of people in prison, including multiple murderers, and when you talk to them one-on-one, they all go, yeah, that voice is there. I've never heard anyone say that they don't know what I'm talking about. And those guys explicitly said, I heard it, just didn't listen to it, right? So that's the still small voice. It's there. It's all for all of us. And then I got into this Hindu teaching. I'm like, wow, this is just spectacular. So I've erased what's been on the board, but I left the one thing. This goes back many months. This is probably like paint now, right? But that's what I put in quotes God, because that means a lot of different things to people. But if you think of God, that works. The Buddha, Samadhi, describes that lake that's in the center of all of our consciousness. Everyone has a lake of comfort, and it's cool on a hot day. It's the eye of a hurricane. It's calm. It's the organized chaos of things, which we'll talk about in a minute. Oh, it's there, all right, no matter what's going on for you. You can't ever lose that voice. It's always there. So I'm calling that Samadhi Lake or source, right? It is the source of really what we're going to be talking about. We all come from that source. It's pure consciousness. It's Christ consciousness. It's Krishna consciousness. It's Buddha nature. It's all of it, okay? We come from that source. Now, here's where the Hindu teachings come in, and then some of my stuff. We all come from that source, so that's what these lines are, right? And we're all connected to that source, whether we know it or not. That cannot be disconnected. And as we extend or come from that source down into the physical world and we take on this physical form, we're still connected to that primary source, right? Well, the Hindu word for this, it's in Sanskrit, is Ahamkara. I looked up the pronunciation of it, and I got like 5 different ones. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it's the concept that matters. Am I saying it right? Close? Ahamkara. And Ahamkara has a couple different meanings to it. Part of it is, it literally means it's an instrument of Aham, which is spirit. Another word for Aham is the supreme heart. I love that, okay? And so Ahamkara is an instrument of the supreme heart. Got it? Now, another definition of it is I-making, which is super interesting. I-making. Now, if you think of yourself as what you are, a divine spiritual being, you have to come into form, and then you have to formulate your I. And that's what we're all experiencing, the development of the I. What is the I? Well, in Greek, what's the Greek meaning for I? It's literally ego. The teaching in Ahamkara, the I-making is, by definition, Ahamkara is the instrument of Aham, a principle of individuation, acting as an independent conscious entity within the impure reality which does not have consciousness on its own. I'll say that a little slower. It's acting as an independent conscious entity, which is these things. It's acting as if it's an independent conscious entity within the impure reality, welcome to the illusion of the physical world, which does not have consciousness of its own. These things don't have consciousness of its own. We come from the source and we fall into this realm of being. We take on the formation of the I-making. We don't have our own consciousness. We're an extension of this. That's why it's an instrument of this. Okay? And we come from that. It is a receptacle of pure consciousness. We've talked about this many times. In many ways, that is what it means to be female. We are the receivers of the spirit. That's, we're all supposed to be, as the Tao says, bringing the Tao to earth. We're supposed to play the feminine role, it says. Because we're a receptacle. We're receiving this consciousness. Guess what if we don't receive that consciousness? We're just in the I formation. And we think we have consciousness, but we don't. You have some sort of vague awareness of things, and you think you're acting in accordance with your own free will or something, but you're not. Jesus said, forgive them, they know not what they do. Because these beings who aren't connected to this consciousness, they're just acting upon, robotic behaviors and conditioning. Okay? So this is all of us go through this, and the experience of falling into the I-making is a separation from source. This can't be avoided. This is the cause of all suffering. Once you take on a body and you got disconnected from source, you're gonna forget. It's a huge part of it. You can never be disconnected from that, but you're gonna forget. We all do, and as a result, we suffer. And we get to this place of being in an operation where now we're all distant. Now, I'm not that creative an artist, but I just drew different colors. That's basically all I had, right? Different size beings, right, and some different colors. This is just called diversity. And in ego formation, coming from source, there's a wide variety of diversity, but yet it's still unified. Well, that's a conundrum. Are we diverse or are we unified? Well, which is it? Do you want to argue about that? Well, how about you just be okay with both of them? We're unified and diverse at the same time. That is the essence of yin-yang, isn't it? Is it one thing or is it two things? There's a little bit of one in the other. What is it? It's one and two at the same time. And in Chinese philosophy, there's a phrase for it, eshofuni, which means two, but not two. We're separate, but we're not. Now, that's hard to grasp unless you want to become spiritual and you work on the actual connection to source again. And then you hear Jesus say something like, to love another as oneself? Love your enemies? What? How are you going to do that? Well, because you are them. They came from the same source as you. You're connected by that thing. That's in everyone else. It's in everyone, right? The mystery, Paul says, is that Christ is in you. Well, there it is. Buddha's first awakening. Oh, we're all Buddha. And we should look at each other and think Buddha. Namaste. The light in me honors the light in you. All of those teachings are saying the same thing. Each one of these beings have that, but each one of them has forgot that. So when we just experience diversity, all the chaos ensues. Here's where I have this line up to chapter 2 of New Eyes called Organized Chaos. Oh, it's chaotic, all right. We're experiencing it. You're experiencing chaos? Yeah, can't avoid it. That is the outer part of the hurricane, isn't it? Oh, that's chaos swirling around. Our minds are like that a lot. Our lives, the physical world's like that. But at the center of it all, just like Samadhi Lake or the eye of the hurricane, it's really peaceful. And what's your job? The only way to get to that peace is to somehow get past the I-making, to somehow get past Ahamkara. And in this word, and one of their teachings is, they don't say the ego, they call it the ego soul. Because you can't separate it. It's an instrument of the soul. And you come into the world, and now we have these bodies. This is why Apostle Paul says we are ultimately designed to do good works in Christ Jesus, things like that. Because we're supposed to come down here and figure out what the heck we are. And if you figure what you are, you will now do good works with the Spirit at your back, right? But the moment you start looking at others as somehow different in a way that separates you from them, you just lost it. And that's why we have to love people who are different than us. And that's without exception. It's every single other being. In Hinduism, in the Gita, it says that in order to attain the infinite spirit, you must see the unity extending from all beings. If you don't see that in everyone, then you won't attain the infinite spirit. What you'll have is ego level consciousness. And on the ego level consciousness, we will experience chaos. And that's not very peaceful. Okay? Well, the Hindus have a word for it called moksha, which is, now what do? Well, moksha it refers to freedom from samsara. Now, samsara is the eternal wheel that we all find ourselves on, okay? It's an eternal wheel. You'll just come back again if you don't learn what we need to learn, okay? If you don't figure it out, that's your home base. Like in the Book of the Dead, it says, as soon as you die, this thing will present itself to you. If you don't identify it as home, you're coming back again, right? That eternal wheel in Eastern philosophy, samsara, is something that has to be escaped. Well, what is it that keeps us stuck in that eternal wheel? The I-making. It's literally the ego that keeps us stuck in it. So moksha is the freedom from samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth. Moksha is ultimately freedom from ignorance. First of all, it's not knowing this. I mean, how many people don't know this? Like everyone, and me most of my life, okay? And when you don't know this, you're going to suffer. It can't be avoided. But if you want to have truth come through you, and you want to experience truth and develop some peace and be an actual uniter, not the dividers is what we all experience. You have to love everyone, and you have to see that we're on the same team without exception. You have to see the light in everyone. Course in Miracles says the only way it can help you is to only see the light in you. It's easy to see the darkness in people. Oh, look how dark that guy is. I was literally just in prison. Several of them are murderers. And I joked with them like I always do. I said, man, I'd love to walk you into a church, right? Wearing your red and orange jumpsuits. Walk you right into that church. And what would most people, what are they doing here? I'm like, you mean the people Jesus hung out with? They love that stuff. I'm like, wow, they like it when Steve comes in. Yeah, because it's validating. Listen, it doesn't matter what you did. Who died next to Jesus and went to heaven with him? Thieves. Did Jesus ask for his rap sheet? Well, let me see what you did. Let's check. No, he said, since you recognize me, you're going to heaven with me. Wow. Recognize me. That's it. Doesn't matter what you did down here. And yet, if you did just good stuff down here, Course in Miracles also calls it's just illusion wrapped in goodness. You think you're so special because you did all these nice things? That's still ego. It's only getting back to this thing is liberation. That's it. And so good people and bad people, that's exactly why you don't eat off the tree of good and evil, okay? I'm better than you because I didn't do all the bad stuff you did. Well, that's more ego. And it's only happening because of where people were planted anyways. What is the I-making? Where does that come from? Well, that's anchor bias. Anchor bias is a psychological construct that says it's a cognitive bias that causes us to rely upon heavily the first piece of information we are given about any topic. Now imagine being, 6 months old. You know how much anchor bias happens? People tell you about what you're supposed to believe. They tell you because you're not thinking for yourself. This is what reality is. This is who you are. This is your name. You're a physical being. This is your race. This is your gender. This is what you wear. This is your favorite team. This is your religion. This is your prophet, right? You didn't come up with any of that. An anchor bias, and love that word because what's an anchor do? You throw an anchor into the lake, keeps you stuck there. I mean, if it's a heavy enough anchor. You can't go anywhere. You're stuck to that anchor. Most of us, as we drop anchor into this world, just stay stuck. And we're so convinced we're right. Because we were told stuff from birth. And if you're told that thing, you rely upon that thing, you pretty much compare everything back to that thing. And until the pain gets great enough, we often don't move off of it, right? And it is what the dark night of the soul is. A way to say, you know what, maybe I want to pick up that anchor and float somewhere else. Maybe I should start to look at this different, you know? Maybe it's not the way I think it is, because that's what everyone else is doing. The eye making, you got 8 billion people, 8 billion different perspectives. This is the blind men and the elephant story, if you know that one, about, you know, which part of the elephant they're touching. And if they're blind, they don't necessarily know they're touching an elephant. You know, one's touching the trunk, one's touching a tail, one's touching the leg, and one says, oh, this is a fan, the other one says it's a wall, you know, whatever. It's a tree trunk or whatever. And yet that they could see, oh, no, it's all the same thing we're touching from different angles. True consciousness, true Christ consciousness, recognize that in everyone else. Oh, we're experiencing the same thing differently. And now you can extend grace to that person in a namaste way. Doesn't mean you vote for them, but you can extend grace to them. And that is breaking free from anchor bias. Because otherwise you just stay rooted in I'm right and you're wrong. You know, that religions are that. If you were born in Syria, you're probably Muslim. If you're born in Connecticut, you're probably Christian. Probably. That's just percentages. And if you have like really intellectual scientific parents who didn't really have some deep experiences, you might find yourself saying, I don't believe in any of this God, because until you prove it to me, I'm not going to believe in that. I'm like, okay, well, they're right from their perspective. But the laws that Jesus came to fulfill are undeniable. These aren't physical laws. They are spiritual laws. They're unavoidable, and we're walking through some of them. We all came from that source, and you did take on an ego, and you anchored yourself in beliefs that you think are true. You're still holding on those beliefs, you're denying the other person their anchor. It's not effective, and we see that again and again. You're wrong because it just doesn't work. No one's convinced by that, right? In fact, it makes people dig in more with their anchors. You can't out-hate the haters. It doesn't work. Well, along comes Jesus to tell us how to do it, and everyone turned his teachings into more behavioral stuff. And it's almost not behavioral at all. What does he say? One commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. He doesn't say anything else other than love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, so those are the two things, and he says the other is like it, so it's one thing, which means love it all. We're going to get to that in the end. Okay, so that's how you lift up the anchor. Moksha, which is liberation, is getting past that. Now, years ago, when I first started getting into addiction work, I started to notice something. Addiction is like all the same stuff. It doesn't matter what drug it is or what alcohol it is or gambling or sex or anything. I started to notice it was all somehow an extension of ego formation. And I dropped, and most people who work with me know I work with heroin addicts all the time. I just never talk about it. We never talk about drugs. Because the actual addiction is to the ego. That's the problem. And the secondary piece is the drugs and the alcohol and all that stuff. That's secondary. And no one clears up their addiction unless they're working on something spiritual. That's why AA can be very, very powerful, because they make you work on that spiritual development. That can be very powerful. So I thought at one point, I should start a group. We'll call it EA, Ego Anonymous. I realized about 10 seconds later that I'm going to get a lot of lawsuits against me if I did that. It's probably not okay to do that. But I've stuck with it ever since inside my head. Everyone in the world is addicted to their ego, 100% of us, and it can't be avoided. And we're addicted to our egos. But at some point you're like, yes, I have a problem. You addicted to your ego, I'm addicted to mine. I'm an ego addict, okay? How effective would that be? Sort of what we're doing here. And people that are interested in this, they're like, yeah, I recognize that. I've become helpless. I can't do it by myself, okay? We're going to talk about that in a minute with my next word. I can't do it. I need something else. I need that other voice to show up more often, because the ego can't do it by itself, by definition. It's having an experience down here that requires that. Has to happen. I'm calling that an egoectomy. Yes, I made that word up. Okay? What's an egoectomy? Well, what's ectomy? The removal of, surgically speaking. Well, moksha is one way, but another way to think of it is we all have to undergo an egoectomy. Now that means the surgical removal of the ego. And again, you can't remove it entirely, and I don't like the concept of ego death because you can't kill the thing. You do have to tame it though. You have to put it in its place. You have to recognize what it is. You have to be awakened or born again. Born again just means this, remembering that you're that. And so the egoectomy is, all right, I need surgical removal of my ego. Now, if you've ever had surgery, did you perform the surgery yourself? Could you? I'm not talking about removing a splinter either. I'm talking about open heart surgery. Could you get in there and do that yourself? I mean, there's some crazy people that have pulled that off out of desperation sometimes. It's really hard to perform surgery on yourself, isn't it? The ego can't do it either. We need another force to do it, okay? In Kabbalah, they call the ego the will to receive. The ego is selfish, okay? And we all have an ego. You can't avoid it. It's selfish, which means we're all selfish. Even people who are doing nice things for other people are doing it so they could feel good, right? I want to feel good. That's still selfish. Kabbalists call it outer giving is really inner taking. I can't live with myself if other people know I didn't give money to the church or whatever, right? It's still ego formation. It's why a dark night of the soul is needed. It's why a crucifixion is needed. It's why all the prophets went through hell before they could get to heaven one way or another. The ego just is selfish and you can't avoid it. And any amount of gymnastics you try to do to try to say, well, that's not me. I truly care about other people. You're doing it so your ego can feel good. That's what it's doing, and that's also why it's selfish. It's not bad. And no one's bad for being like that. It's unavoidable. It's like dogs. I remember I have this awesome dog, so lovable. One time I got down to try to pretend like I was going to eat the food out of its bowl. It's a rescue pit bull. It growled at me, right? And I'm like, ooh, okay. You're so loving, but yeah, don't mess with that dog's food, right? Because they're wired to be selfish too. Unavoidable, got it? Now, because it's unavoidable, in order to get past that, if you start to seek spirit, guess what has to happen? Egoectomy, the universe becomes the surgeon. God does for us what we cannot do for ourselves, okay? The ego shows up as a surgeon. And it does it in many ways. I could do 3 hours on this, if not 30 years or whatever on this. But it's all of the physical things that happen to you in your life. It's all your relationships. It's all of your emotions. Kabbalah says beautifully, it says, the universe will just layer emotions upon you. You don't even know where it's coming from. They talk about the upper world and the lower world. I just drew it for you. Well, the emotions that we feel are almost always coming from the upper world. And it's like, all right, this guy needs a little help here, so let's put that pressure on him, and this guy needs that over there, whatever. And these forces happen to you, and you've got this job, this responsibility, which is extremely similar to your responsibility as a patient. If a doctor is performing surgery on you and you resist, what happens? It's going to be bloodier, isn't it? All right? What if you're getting open heart surgery and you're like, no, get that knife away from me, okay? And you resist that. It ain't going to work, isn't it? Your only job, if someone is performing surgery on you, what's your only job as a patient? Surrender to it. You have to let it happen. It's why Jesus on the cross, he had to surrender. What was he physically? He wasn't fighting back. And I don't mean political surrender, okay? I don't mean surrender. We don't tell our kids, if that bully at school slaps you on one cheek, make them slap you on the other. That stuff is misunderstood. Jesus isn't saying let people abuse you. Turn the other cheek means instead of this cheek, it's this cheek. You have two beings after all, a spiritual being and a physical being. Turn the other cheek, go to the other side, go to the spiritual side. But it doesn't mean let people abuse you at all. And like I said so many times, it doesn't mean you have to vote for this or that. You do what your will or the spirit in you tells you to do. That's what you should do, okay? But from the ego formation piece, and we want to try to get past that so we can connect to this thing called the spirit. From that place, your job is to surrender. What does the word Islam mean? Surrender. What does the word Muslim mean? One who has surrendered. And to do it the right way is to say, not my will be done. Jesus didn't want to go through the crucifixion, but he says, not my will be done. Thy will be done. Ooh, that's some graceful surrender. And then he walked to the cross willingly as a patient who says, God knows what he's doing with me. Right? Because at that point, he becomes a really bad role model for most of us in the ego world. Kids, let's go to church. Let's learn about Jesus. He let people kill him. Now, who's ever said that to anyone? We got to follow Jesus. Got to find someone to kill you. And if someone is nice to you, like Peter said, I want to stop it. I'm not going to let Jesus get killed. Jesus said, Satan, get behind me. Because Jesus knew he needed to go through that. All right, newsflash. Metaphor. All right? Please don't take that literally in your life. It's a metaphor for the ego's experience. This thing does have to go through it. And it's going to get crucified. It has to happen. That's why he told Peter, Satan, get behind me. Because the ego was trying to stop it. You have to go through it. You cannot avoid it. It's very difficult. If you took on an eye, it's going to get crucified. Now, the point of that is to get past the ego experience into a more divine experience, and then have the human experience. In a word, all of that is just trust. Like I said, we can do a lot more with this, and we will when we talk as a group. But trusting your experiences is very foundational. It's like the most important word in many ways. It's another word for that would be faith. It's not necessarily understanding, although most of this is talking about understanding this stuff. You don't have to understand it, but you do have to submit to it. And the idea is what you're going through, it is an egoectomy, and the universe is your surgeon. And it's doing something, unless you believe, and again, a lot of people aren't spiritual, they're going to think this is silly. So whatever. They can do whatever they want, that's fine. But if you are interested in the spiritual development, you either believe in the universe or God or you don't. I don't think there's any in between. I don't think God is messing with people. I think he's performing surgery on people. And then you have that experience, and it looks messy, but as you said earlier, it was one of the best things that ever happened to you, right? This is my life's work. The prison story I told you, that guy was like, wait a minute, there's another voice inside of there. I'm like, yeah, awakening. Well, you can see it's happening. It's awakening. And story after story, as a therapist, once you know what to look for, it's like, yeah, okay, see, it's the bad stuff that gets people there. It doesn't have to be like that. The Kabbalists call it the path of pain and the path of light, but like we never choose the path of light. We choose the path of pain, and we get pushed through pain, and we get pushed into the awakening experience. It almost can happen in no other way. So the trust, and I drew this in here, and by the way, I took my blue pen to prison and I left it there. So I don't have my blue pen anymore, so I picked purple, it's close enough. If you do it the right way, your spirit here, the higher spirit comes into you. And now if your eye is single, your whole body's filled with light. Whether it's your consciousness, head, or your heart, the supreme heart, they're both filled with spirit. Now, you're connected to this again. That's born again. That's enlightened. That's awakened. Okay? That's all those things. Faith without works is dead. It's through grace alone that you're saved, but faith without works is dead. If you don't get this, there's nothing else to do. No behavior gets you there. You're not superior than someone else because you didn't commit a crime or whatever. It doesn't exist. There's no rap sheet to look at in heaven. It's through grace alone, and that is found in this. That's why everyone's forgiven. And I love the teaching of why God doesn't forgive. I might have told you guys before, but I love to talk to Christians in particular, and they're so convinced God will forgive them. And I say, no, I'm convinced he won't forgive you. And they're like, that's ridiculous. You can't be a Christian if you don't believe that. I said, it's true. And in 5 seconds, you're going to agree with me. And they're like, no way will I agree with you. And I say, how do you forgive someone that you're not mad at? That's grace. God, or whatever this is, ain't mad at any of us. How do you forgive someone you're not mad at? God would understand all of this. You get separated from this thing, you're going to do some bad stuff. And you're going to feel some pain, you're going to feel some suffering, you're going to feel disconnected, all of that. That's part of the experience. But the remembering it again, to go back to that, that's just called grace. And then if you do that, faith without works is dead. You're not just supposed to revel in your, first of all, spiritual people don't argue about who's more spiritual, right? I think I'm more I forgive better than you. Okay, that ain't spiritual, that's more ego stuff. But having the experience of that again is purely unifying, because now it's like, I appreciate the diversity in all of us. That includes these people I disagree with, though. It's just not, physical world people you agree with. It's everybody. And then you can appreciate the beauty of the whole thing, because that chaos that they probably brought into your life helped wake you up, right? Better love your enemy as a result. And then the game is over one day when you die. Like I said, from the Book of the Dead, if you recognize this as your home, you say, oh, that's my home. I should go there. If you don't recognize it, you're still in eye-making. And then Samsara continues and come back around again. On the other side, whatever that means, it's really the true side. You're going to see those enemies, but you're going to see them as one. And you're going to be like, oh my gosh, well, that was an amazing trip I just went on, right? But the personal experience of it is you pulling in the spirit into your physical formation. It's the end of the eye-making. And this whole philosophy goes way deeper than this. I just scratched the surface. But the whole journey ends up in this place. And the whole thing was indeed a script. It's a narrative. If I slide in superposition here, we're going to talk about it for 5 more hours. But it's a script that you have partial control over. Some parts you don't. Like you can't decide if you want your heart to beat or not. It's got to be. You also can't control any of these things I described. But you can through free will. You can through free will determine whether or not you want to seek this. And then you have to practice it, right? You put it into some sort of method. And if you get good at it, like anything else in the world, you're going to get better at it. Practice makes perfect. Next thing you know, you're feeling this, and I love this. Jesus said, I'm not doing anything. I, the ego, I'm not doing anything. I'm doing only what my Father tells me to do. And he's not talking about daddy, okay? This is the Father. And if you listen to that, what does that thing do? It tells you what to do. It tells you what to say. Luke 12:12 says that the Holy Spirit will tell you what to say in that moment. And if I walk into prison and I'm all judgmental of those people there, I don't say the right thing. But if I'm in the zone of spirit, then I tend to say the right thing. If I'm watching a football game, I usually get into the ego. I say the wrong things, and then I feel the wrong way, and I think results are bad. Like the Steeler game the other day, losing on the last play to the Cowboys of all teams. That's bad, and then I'm back in that ego formation. You can tell immediately because of the way it feels. But when you get connected to that, it's pure, it's divine, it's source, it's grace. You know you're there. It's an addiction, and it's a good one, and you just want to drink from it again and again. That's the well Jesus tends. You drink from that bottle, you're going to be thirsty again. You drink from that well, you'll never be thirsty again. Okay? So go get an egoectomy.